The strangest people in your life are not the ones who suddenly appear, they are the ones who somehow make you question memories you were certain never existed. My name is Noah Walker, and if you had asked me a week ago what the biggest problem in my life was, I probably would have complained about calculus homework or the cafeteria serving mystery meat every Thursday. Instead, my biggest problem had become Emma Brooks. Not because she was mean. Not because she was annoying. Quite the opposite. Emma was the kind of student every teacher trusted, every freshman admired, and every senior somehow knew by name. She volunteered at charity events, organized school activities, smiled at everyone she passed, and somehow managed to make arriving 5 minutes early look effortless. I preferred being invisible. I sat near the back of every classroom, spent lunch beneath the old oak tree behind the science building, and usually carried a notebook filled with random thoughts instead of joining conversations. People left me alone, and I liked it that way. At least I used to. Everything changed on Monday morning when I stepped out of history class and noticed Emma standing across the hallway looking directly at me. At first I assumed she was waiting for someone else. Then she smiled. I immediately looked behind me. Nobody. She was definitely looking at me. I pretended to check my phone even though the screen was completely black. When I looked up again, she was still there. Tuesday I left chemistry through a different hallway. Somehow Emma appeared outside the library. Wednesday I took the long route past the art classrooms. She was talking with a teacher near the staircase and waved the moment she saw me. Thursday I convinced myself I needed extra time in the computer lab just to avoid crossing the main courtyard. When I finally walked outside, there she was again, standing beside the fountain with the same patient smile. It felt less like coincidence and more like the universe had decided to play a practical joke at my expense. My best friend Liam thought the whole situation was hilarious. Do you realize half the guys in this school would trade places with you without thinking twice? He asked while balancing 2 chocolate milk cartons on our lunch table. You make it sound like I won some kind of contest, I replied. Maybe you did. He leaned closer with a grin. Maybe she secretly likes quiet guys. I shook my head. No. This feels different. Different how? I searched for an answer but could not find one. Emma never looked embarrassed when she saw me. She never acted nervous. She looked relieved. As though every time she found me, she quietly confirmed something important. That expression bothered me more than anything else because it felt strangely familiar, like hearing the first few notes of a song you know by heart without remembering its name. Friday morning arrived with bright sunshine pouring through the tall hallway windows of Brookside High. Students crowded the corridors, laughing, opening lockers, and talking about weekend plans. I told myself I would walk straight to my next class without making eye contact with anyone. It was a simple plan. It lasted exactly 4 seconds. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I stopped so suddenly that another student nearly bumped into me from behind. Emma was already there, standing outside the history classroom with both hands resting lightly on the straps of her backpack. She was completely alone. She was not talking to friends. She was not looking at her phone. She was waiting. A few nearby students noticed where she was looking and gradually lowered their voices. The hallway suddenly felt much quieter than it really was. Emma smiled the same gentle smile I had seen all week, took one small step forward, and said softly, "Hi, Noah. I have been waiting for you." For a few seconds, I completely forgot how to answer. The hallway remained as noisy as ever, filled with conversations, footsteps, and locker doors slamming shut, yet somehow everything around me faded into the background. Emma waited patiently without saying another word. She did not seem embarrassed that dozens of students had already started glancing in our direction. If anything, she looked relieved that I had finally stopped running away long enough to stand still. I cleared my throat. "Hi. Brilliant, Noah. Truly inspirational." She smiled a little wider. "Do you have a minute?" My first instinct was exactly the same as it had been all week. Escape. Find another hallway. Pretend I had forgotten a homework assignment. Suddenly remember an imaginary appointment somewhere on the opposite side of the building. Unfortunately, every possible escape route required walking directly past her. Actually, I said while adjusting the strap of my backpack for absolutely no reason, I kind of have somewhere to be. Emma glanced toward the classroom schedule posted beside the door before looking back at me. I thought you had study hall next. I blinked. How do you know that? She hesitated for a fraction of a second. I saw you heading to the library after this class yesterday. I guessed you probably had study hall again today. That explanation sounded perfectly reasonable, yet it somehow made me even more curious. Before either of us could continue, Liam walked out of the classroom carrying 2 textbooks under one arm. He looked at me, then at Emma, then back at me again with the biggest grin I had ever seen on his face. Well, he announced dramatically, I suddenly remembered my locker has been feeling emotionally neglected. I sighed. You are not helping. I disagree. He pointed between us. I think I am helping this story move forward. Emma covered a small laugh with her hand while I considered finding a new best friend. Liam gave me a quick thumbs up before disappearing into the crowd as if his job was officially finished. I am sorry, Emma said softly after he left. I did not mean to make things awkward. It has definitely been a little awkward, I admitted. I know. She lowered her eyes for a moment before meeting mine again. That is why I wanted to talk to you. A group of students walked past us whispering just loudly enough for both of us to hear. Is she waiting for him again? Who even is that guy? Maybe they are secretly dating. I resisted the urge to hide inside the nearest classroom. Emma looked genuinely uncomfortable that people were talking about us. I never wanted rumors, she said quietly. Neither did I. For a brief moment. We simply stood there listening to the hallway settle back into its usual rhythm. Then Emma took a slow breath. Would you meet me after school? She asked. Just 10 minutes. That is all I am asking. I studied her face carefully. There was no pressure in her expression, no expectation that I owed her anything. Only quiet hope, as though this conversation mattered much more than I could possibly understand. Every logical part of me insisted I should politely refuse. My life had been simple before this week. It could become simple again if I just walked away. But another feeling had started growing stronger every time I looked at her. It was impossible to explain. She did not feel like a stranger. She felt like someone standing just beyond the edge of a memory I could almost reach. I let out a slow breath. All right, I finally said. 10 minutes after school. Relief washed across her face so naturally that it almost caught me off guard. Thank you, she whispered. The warning bell echoed through the hallway, sending students rushing toward their next classes. Emma stepped back to give me space and offered one small smile before turning away. I will wait by the front entrance, she said. If you decide not to come, I will understand. I watched her disappear into the crowd, but one question stayed behind long after she was gone. Why did it feel like she had been waiting for much more than just 10 minutes? The final bell rang a little after 3 o'clock, but instead of rushing toward the parking lot like everyone else, I stayed in my seat for another minute pretending to organize papers that had already been perfectly organized. I kept telling myself I was only delaying the inevitable. Maybe if I walked slowly enough, Emma would assume I had changed my mind and leave. It was not a particularly kind thought, and deep down I already knew it would not happen. By the time I finally stepped outside the front entrance of Brookside High, the afternoon sun had settled into a warm golden glow that stretched long shadows across the sidewalk. Students filled the parking lot with weekend excitement, climbing into cars, laughing with friends, and making plans that sounded much more normal than whatever was about to happen to me. I scanned the crowd without meaning to. At first I did not see her. Then I noticed the large maple tree beside the front gate. Emma stood beneath it with both hands gently holding the straps of her backpack. She was completely alone. She was not scrolling through her phone or talking to anyone. Every few seconds she looked toward the school entrance before quietly waiting again. Somehow that simple patience made me feel even more guilty for spending the last week avoiding her. "You actually came." Her voice carried genuine surprise as I walked closer. "I said I would. A lot of people say things they never do." I shrugged awkwardly. I figured keeping at least one promise today was a good start. A small smile appeared on her face. "I appreciate that." Before either of us could continue, Liam suddenly appeared from behind me carrying his skateboard under one arm. "There you are," he announced dramatically. I was about to file a missing person report. I sighed. "Do you practice your timing?" "Naturally." He looked at Emma and offered a friendly wave. "Good luck." Emma blinked. "With what?" Liam pointed toward me with exaggerated seriousness. "Getting him to stop overthinking absolutely everything." "That seems impossible," Emma replied with a laugh. "It is," I admitted. Liam grinned triumphantly. "See? Progress already." With that, he pushed off on his skateboard and rolled toward the parking lot, calling over his shoulder, "Have a nice conversation, you two." I watched him disappear before shaking my head. I am never going to hear the end of this. "Probably not," Emma said with an amused smile. We started walking slowly along the sidewalk leading away from the school. Neither of us seemed eager to rush the conversation. The quiet felt surprisingly comfortable. Cars passed by every few moments while leaves drifted gently across the pavement in the afternoon breeze. Finally Emma stopped walking and turned toward me. There was no nervous smile this time, only calm determination. "There is something I have wanted to ask you all week," she said softly. "Go ahead." She took one slow breath before meeting my eyes. "Noah." She hesitated just long enough for my curiosity to grow. "Do you really not remember me?" The question landed with unexpected weight. I searched her face, hoping that somehow the answer would appear if I looked carefully enough. Her eyes held recognition. Hope. Sadness. They were looking at someone they had known for years. I wished I could say I felt the same certainty. Instead, all I could offer was the truth. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "I feel like I should know you. I honestly do. But no matter how hard I try, I cannot remember where we first met." Emma lowered her eyes for a brief moment, then nodded as though she had already prepared herself for that answer. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she whispered. "Now I know where we have to begin." Emma looked back toward the school for a moment as the last few students disappeared from the parking lot. The afternoon had become wonderfully quiet, leaving only the distant sound of passing cars and leaves rustling gently in the breeze. She folded her hands together as if deciding how to begin a story she had rehearsed countless times. "There is a coffee shop 2 blocks from here," she said softly. "Would you meet me there tomorrow morning?" I frowned slightly. "Tomorrow?" She nodded. "It will be quieter. I think it will make more sense there." Every sensible thought in my head suggested I should politely decline. I barely knew this girl. At least, that was what my memory insisted. But the strange feeling that had followed me all week had only grown stronger. Every conversation with Emma made me feel less like I was meeting someone new and more like I was standing outside a room I had somehow forgotten how to enter. "All right," I finally said. "Tomorrow morning." The relief that crossed her face was so genuine that it almost made me feel guilty for hesitating in the first place. "Thank you," she whispered. We continued walking together until we reached the corner where our paths separated. Before leaving, Emma turned back toward me. "Can I ask one more question?" "Sure. Do you still carry a notebook everywhere?" I instinctively looked down at the backpack hanging from my Shoulder. Sometimes. Do you still draw? The question caught me completely off guard. Not really, I admitted. I used to sketch a little when I was younger, but I stopped years ago. She lowered her eyes with a small, thoughtful smile. I wondered if maybe you still did. Why? She hesitated just long enough to make me even more curious. Because someone once told me every story deserved a tiny star in the corner of the page. I stared at her without answering. For reasons I could not explain, those words stirred something deep inside my mind. It was not a complete memory. It was more like the faint outline of one. I saw the corner of a notebook page. I saw the tip of a silver pencil moving across white paper. Then, almost as quickly as it appeared, the image vanished. Noah? Emma asked gently. I blinked and realized I had been staring into space. Sorry. I rubbed the back of my neck. For a second. I thought I remembered something. Her expression changed immediately. She did not look excited. She looked careful, almost afraid that saying too much might make the moment disappear. What did you remember? Nothing clear. I searched for the right words. Just, a little silver star. Emma closed her eyes for the briefest moment before smiling to herself. When she looked at me again, there was quiet hope shining in her eyes. That is enough for today, she said. Really? Really? She adjusted the strap of her backpack and took a small step backward. Tomorrow I will show you something that belongs to both of us. Before I could ask what she meant, she offered one last warm smile and started walking toward the neighborhood across the street. I remained standing on the sidewalk until she disappeared around the corner. The image of that tiny silver star refused to leave my thoughts. I had no idea why such a simple drawing suddenly felt so important, but for the first time all week, I was no longer wondering why Emma had been looking for me. I was wondering what part of my own life had been quietly waiting for me to remember it. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies and a cool breeze that made Maple Street feel quieter than it ever did during the week. I reached the little coffee shop 5 minutes early, mostly because I had spent the entire drive wondering what Emma could possibly show me that belonged to both of us. The small bell above the entrance chimed softly as I stepped inside. Warm sunlight poured through the front windows, filling the room with golden light and the comforting smell of fresh pastries. Emma was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 steaming cups waiting between us. When she saw me, her shoulders relaxed almost immediately. You came, she said with a gentle smile. I told you I would. Thank you. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable anymore. It felt patient, like both of us understood that some conversations should never be rushed. Emma slid one of the cups toward me. Hot chocolate, she said. I remembered you never liked coffee. I smiled politely. Either you have an incredible memory, or you are making an impressive guess. Maybe both. We both laughed quietly, and the last traces of awkwardness seemed to disappear. After another moment, Emma reached into her backpack and carefully placed an old blue notebook on the table. The cover had faded with age, and the edges showed years of careful use, but it had clearly been protected as though it were something precious. She rested one hand on top of it before looking at me. Do you remember moving away after elementary school? She asked. I nodded. My father accepted a new job, and we moved out of state for several years before coming back. That is exactly when everything changed. She slowly pushed the notebook toward me. Go ahead. I hesitated only a second before opening the first page. Bright pencil drawings covered the paper. Silly superheroes, impossible inventions, comic strips with crooked speech bubbles, and tiny doodles filled every empty corner. They looked exactly like something 2 children would create during recess while pretending homework did not exist. I smiled without realizing it. These are actually kind of funny. Emma laughed softly. We certainly thought they were. I turned another page, then another. Every drawing carried the same playful energy until my eyes suddenly stopped on a tiny silver shooting star drawn neatly in the bottom right corner. My fingers froze against the paper. My breathing slowed. The little symbol felt impossibly familiar. Without thinking, I traced the outline with my fingertip. "I know this," I whispered. "I have seen this before." Emma remained completely silent, giving me space to follow the memory wherever it wanted to go. The coffee shop around us seemed to disappear. For one brief moment I was no longer looking at an old notebook. I saw sunlight pouring through an elementary school classroom window. I saw two children sitting side by side with colored pencils scattered across their desks. One of them carefully drew a tiny silver star in the corner of every page before proudly declaring that every adventure needed its own lucky symbol. The memory vanished almost as quickly as it had arrived, but this time it left something behind. Certainty. I slowly looked up at Emma. "That was me," I said quietly. "I drew those stars." She smiled, and I noticed her eyes becoming slightly brighter with emotion. "You did," she answered. "You told me that no matter how long a story became, the little star would always remind us where it began." Suddenly the notebook no longer looked like an old collection of childhood sketches. It looked like the first missing piece of a life I had forgotten, waiting all these years for someone patient enough to place it back into my hands. The little silver star stayed in my thoughts long after I closed the notebook. I sat there quietly, my fingertips still resting on the worn cover, as if moving too quickly might cause the memory to disappear again. Emma did not interrupt the silence. She simply wrapped both hands around her cup and waited with the same patient kindness she had shown ever since she first stood outside my classroom. Finally I looked up. "I cannot remember everything," I admitted. "But I know that notebook belongs in my memories." Emma nodded gently. "That is all I hoped for." She reached into her backpack once more and carefully placed a small bundle of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon on the table. The paper looked old but remarkably well preserved. "There is something else," she said quietly. "These are the letters we wrote after you moved away." I stared at the bundle in surprise. "You kept all of them?" "Every single one." Her answer came without hesitation. I could never bring myself to throw them away. I slowly untied the ribbon and picked up the first envelope. Even before opening it, I recognized the uneven handwriting across the front. It was mine. Smaller, messier, and unmistakably written by an 11-year-old boy who had been trying far too hard to make every letter perfectly straight. I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. "I cannot believe this." Emma watched quietly as I unfolded the paper inside. The page had yellowed slightly over the years, but every word remained easy to read. Most of the letter was exactly what I would expect from a child. I described a new school, complained about homework, and proudly explained that I had learned how to ride my bicycle without training wheels. Then my eyes reached the last paragraph. I had written, "I promise we will keep making stories together even if we live far apart. I will never forget my first best friend." My chest tightened. I read the sentence twice before looking at Emma. "I really wrote this?" She smiled softly. "You always believed promises mattered." I lowered my eyes to the paper again. "Then why did I stop writing?" Emma gave a small shrug. "Life became busy. Your family moved again. My letters started coming back with forwarding labels. Eventually they stopped coming back at all." There was no accusation in her voice. She spoke about it the same way someone describes the weather changing with the seasons. "I waited for a while," she continued. "Then I decided I would keep the letters instead of wondering why they stopped. I felt a quiet wave of guilt settle over me. I am sorry." She immediately shook her head. "No." Her voice remained calm but certain. "You were a child. None of this was your fault. I looked down at the notebook, the letters, and the tiny silver stars scattered across the pages. They were not just objects anymore. They were pieces of a friendship that had survived years without asking for anything in return. "Do you know something strange?" I asked. Emma tilted her head. "What?" I smiled faintly. "I still cannot remember every conversation we had, but I already know the kind of person I wanted to be back then." She looked at me curiously. "How?" I gently tapped the final sentence of the letter. "Because whoever wrote this believed that people were worth remembering." Emma's eyes brightened with quiet emotion before she laughed softly through her smile. "That sounds exactly like you." I leaned back in my chair and looked out the cafe window where morning sunlight filled Maple Street with warmth. Somewhere deep inside, another memory stirred, not as a complete picture but as a feeling. Two children sitting beneath a giant oak tree, laughing over impossible comic book heroes while carefully drawing one tiny silver star after another. This time the memory did not disappear immediately. It stayed just long enough for me to realize that perhaps forgotten moments never truly vanished. Sometimes they simply waited for the right person to bring them home. For a long moment, neither of us reached for the notebook or the letters again. They remained quietly between us on the wooden table, no longer feeling like forgotten objects but like old friends that had finally finished waiting. The coffee shop buzzed softly with conversations, the gentle clinking of cups, and the comforting smell of fresh pastries drifting through the warm morning air. Somehow every ordinary sound made the silence between us feel even more peaceful. I looked at Emma and smiled awkwardly. "I owe you an apology." She tilted her head. "For what?" "For spending an entire week acting like you were some kind of mysterious problem I needed to escape from." She laughed quietly. "You did change hallways 3 different times." "Only 3. Actually, I think it was 4. I covered my face with one hand. "Please tell me you are exaggerating." "I wish I was." Her laughter became brighter, and before long I found myself laughing too. The strange tension that had followed us since Monday finally disappeared. It felt surprisingly easy to smile around her now. "You know what makes this even more embarrassing?" I admitted. "I genuinely thought you were somehow predicting where I would be." Emma smiled with playful amusement. "No. You just always walked exactly where you used to when we were kids." I frowned. "Really? Whenever you wanted to think, you looked for the quietest place you could find." She pointed gently toward my backpack. "You still carry a notebook. You still sit under big trees whenever you can. You changed a lot, Noah, but not nearly as much as you think." Her words settled gently inside me. Maybe memories were not the only things people carried through life. Maybe habits quietly protected pieces of us long after the reasons behind them had faded away. Emma wrapped both hands around her cup before speaking again. "Can I tell you something I never admitted to anyone?" "Of course." She looked down at the notebook for a moment. "When I heard your family was moving back to Brookside, I spent almost 2 weeks trying to decide whether I should even talk to you." That surprised me. "Why?" She smiled faintly. "I was afraid you would not remember me." I looked at her with quiet disbelief. "You already knew that was possible?" She nodded. "I told myself that if you remembered, everything would be easy. If you did not." She paused before finishing the sentence. "Then I would have to decide whether the friendship was worth starting all over again." I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. "And what did you decide?" Emma met my eyes without hesitation. "That some people are worth introducing yourself to twice." I could not think of an answer immediately. The sentence was simple, but it carried years of patience inside it. Finally I smiled. "I am really glad you did." She smiled back, and for a brief second another memory quietly surfaced. 2 children sitting beneath the giant oak tree behind their elementary school, arguing about whether a superhero squirrel should wear a blue cape or a red one. I heard laughter this time. Mine. Hers. It was still blurry around the edges, but it stayed long enough for me to recognize the feeling that surrounded it. Happiness. Genuine. Uncomplicated happiness. I remember something else, I said softly. Emma's eyes widened with hopeful excitement. What was it? I laughed. Captain Acorn. She stared at me for half a heartbeat before breaking into the brightest smile I had seen all morning. You remembered him. He apparently saved the world with kindness. Several times, she replied proudly. We both laughed again, and this time it did not feel like two people trying to reconnect after years apart. It felt like two old friends picking up a conversation that had simply paused for a little longer than either of them had expected. By the time we stepped outside the coffee shop, the morning had quietly slipped into early afternoon. Maple Street felt peaceful beneath a bright blue sky, and neither of us seemed interested in ending the conversation. Emma carefully placed the notebook and the letters back inside her backpack with the same gentle care she had shown all morning. We started walking without deciding where to go, eventually finding ourselves following the sidewalk toward the small neighborhood park a few blocks away. The air smelled faintly of fresh grass, and a light breeze carried the sound of children laughing somewhere beyond the trees. I think this is the first time all week you are not trying to avoid me, Emma said with a playful smile. I laughed softly. That is because I finally realized avoiding you required much more effort than simply talking to you. I noticed you were becoming very creative. I was not creative. I shook my head dramatically. I was desperate. You took 3 different staircases just to avoid one conversation. Please stop remembering things that make me look ridiculous. She smiled. I cannot help it. They are some of my favorite memories from this week. We both laughed as we entered the park. Sunlight shimmered across the quiet duck pond while families relaxed on nearby benches and a group of children chased bubbles floating through the warm afternoon air. Everything around us felt wonderfully ordinary, and somehow that ordinary afternoon became one of the most meaningful moments I had experienced in years. We found an empty bench beneath a large maple tree overlooking the water. For a while we simply watched the ducks glide across the pond without saying anything. The silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable. Emma finally spoke first. Can I admit something? She asked quietly. Always. She looked down at her hands before smiling to herself. When I first saw your name on the new student list, I imagined dozens of different conversations. Really? She nodded. In almost every version, you remembered me immediately. I am sorry that one did not happen. She turned toward me and gently shook her head. Do not be. Her voice remained calm. If you had remembered everything on the first day, we never would have had all these conversations. I thought about that for a moment before smiling. That is actually true. She looked across the pond where sunlight reflected like hundreds of tiny silver stars dancing on the water. Sometimes I wondered if forgetting meant that I had never been important to you. I immediately turned toward her. Emma. She looked back at me. Forgetting is not the same as not caring. I spoke slowly, choosing every word with care. My memories disappeared because time kept moving. They did not disappear because you stopped mattering. She searched my face quietly, as though deciding whether she believed me. You really think that? I know it. I smiled gently. Even before I remembered the notebook, I could never understand why seeing you felt so familiar. Some part of me recognized you long before my mind did. Her shoulders relaxed, and she let out a slow breath she seemed to have been holding for years. Thank you, she whispered. I looked toward the pond again where the afternoon breeze created tiny ripples across the water. I think memories are strange, I said. Sometimes they disappear from our heads for a while, but they leave little pieces behind. Like what? She asked. I smiled. Like the places we choose to sit. The stories we enjoy. The people we somehow trust without knowing why. Emma laughed softly. And tiny silver stars? Especially tiny silver stars. We sat there smiling as the sunlight shimmered across the pond, and somewhere deep inside I realized something important. I was no longer trying to recover a friendship that belonged to the past. Without even noticing when it happened, we had already started creating entirely new memories together. Monday morning felt strangely familiar, but this time the feeling was comforting instead of confusing. The streets leading to Brookside High looked exactly the same as they had every other school day. Students hurried across the parking lot carrying backpacks, coffee cups, and unfinished homework while the first rays of sunlight reflected across the classroom windows. Everything around me was completely ordinary. The only thing that had changed was the reason I arrived 10 minutes early. Last week I would have spent those extra minutes planning how to avoid one specific person. Today I walked straight to the history hallway without hesitation. I leaned against the wall outside the classroom, slipped both hands into the pocket of my hoodie, and quietly waited. A few students walked past and glanced at me with curious expressions before continuing toward their lockers. I almost smiled to myself. They probably wondered why the quiet guy who normally arrived just before the bell was suddenly standing in the hallway so early. The answer was simple. Some people were worth waiting for. A few minutes later I saw Emma turn the corner at the far end of the hallway. She was talking with two classmates until she looked up and noticed me. She stopped walking so suddenly that her friends followed her gaze before exchanging amused smiles. After quietly saying goodbye, they continued toward their classroom, leaving Emma standing there with an expression that mixed surprise, happiness, and disbelief all at once. She slowly walked toward me, still smiling. "You are here early," she said. "I know. Waiting for someone?" I nodded. "Yeah." She looked around dramatically before asking, "Should I know this person?" I laughed. "Probably." She folded her arms with playful curiosity. "Who is it?" I smiled. "A girl who spent an entire week proving that she was far more patient than I ever deserved." Emma covered her mouth as she laughed. "You practiced that answer?" "Maybe." "How long?" "Long enough to realize every version sounded awkward." Mission accomplished. We both laughed together, and for the first time the hallway felt exactly the way it should have from the beginning. Comfortable. Familiar. Honest. Just then Liam rounded the corner carrying a breakfast sandwich and nearly stopped in the middle of the hallway. He looked at me, then at Emma, before pointing dramatically in my direction. "I cannot believe what I am seeing." I sighed. "Good morning to you too." "Absolutely not." He shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. "Last week you were practically training for the hallway avoidance championship. Now you are the one waiting." Emma smiled beside me while I shrugged. "People can change." Liam grinned. "Apparently they can." He lifted his sandwich like it was a trophy. "This is the greatest character development I have witnessed all semester." Before either of us could answer, the first warning bell echoed through the building. Students hurried past us toward their classrooms, filling the hallway with cheerful conversations and familiar morning energy. Emma looked at me with the same warm smile she had worn outside my classroom on that first unforgettable morning, except now there was no uncertainty left in either of our expressions. "So," she asked softly, "what happens now?" I glanced toward the classroom door before looking back at her. "I think we stop trying to find the years we lost." She tilted her head slightly. "Then what do we do instead?" I smiled. "We make every new memory count." She nodded without saying another word, because she did not have to. Together we walked into history class side by side, and as I opened my notebook on the desk, my pencil moved almost automatically toward the bottom corner of the first page. Without even thinking about it, I drew one tiny silver star. I looked at it for a second before smiling to myself. Some memories return as pictures. Some return as feelings. And sometimes the most important ones quietly guide your hand home before your heart even realizes it has finally found the place where the story was always meant to continue.